Hello, welcome to Remember the Film, the podcast where nothing means more than being together. I'm your host, Josh Bradley. I'm joined by my co-host, Jeff Grizz Ulrich.
Hello!
And Hugo Panay. What's up, Hugo?
Hello. Doing all right. What about you?
A little rattled from the movie we had to watch last night, but otherwise doing pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah,
well,
big
I also watched Polytechnique today because, time zones. So, yeah.
And that's also pretty rough, isn't it?
That is pretty rough. Yeah. It's pretty dark.
I was going through Denis Villeneuve's filmography to make the outline for this episode, and I hadn't really heard of Polytechnique, and that's the only movie in his filmography that's specifically called out as controversial. And I'm like, man, if this one's the controversial one in his filmography, yikes.
I think it's controversial just because it portrays a real life event, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily more violent than his other work.
Yeah, so today we're talking about the movies of Denis Villeneuve, our French-Canadian favorite, and specifically his, not debut movie, but the first movie that made me wave for him, which is Incendies from 2010.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, let's just dive into our main topic. Denis Villeneuve, anything before we dive in?
No, let's dive.
All right,
let's do it.
Cool. Like I said, Denis Villeneuve, French-Canadian, born in Quebec. His mom was a homemaker, his dad was a notary, and I just want to note that because a notary is a main character in Incendies. And also, I feel like it makes sense that Denis Villeneuve is a fan of notaries, because they're record keepers, and I don't want to say Denis Villeneuve's movies are emotionless, because they're certainly very emotional, but he is kind of, some of his filmography is kind of cold and detached. And not saying notaries are cold and detached, but they are record keepers. They are witnesses, and I kind of get that sense from his movies sometimes.
I agree. You get the feeling from his movies that you are witnessing something.
Yes.
More than you are necessarily engaging with the characters' personalities.
How about this? Given how emotional the content of his movies can be, I feel like he's never telling me how to feel about it.
Right.
Less so than most directors. Yeah.
He very much. I think he himself cites Kubrick as one of his major inspirations.
Yeah, I see that.
And I think you can tell because he very much does the same thing of showing very powerful, complex situations, but in a kind of a matter of fact kind of way.
Yeah,
and he doesn't really guide you through it, and kind of lets you draw your own conclusions.
Yeah, that was actually something I was thinking about just as we were watching Incendies. The fact that there was a notary as a character, I kind of started connecting Denis Villeneuve to notaries as I was watching that, and it wasn't until later that I realized his dad was a notary, so that's why I'm mentioning it now. Makes sense, kind of. His debut feature film was in 1998 with a movie called, August 32nd on Earth, which was selected as Canada's entry for the Best Foreign Language Film Oscar, but it wasn't nominated, back when the Best International Feature Oscar was called the Best Foreign Language Film Oscar. Second movie came out 2 years later in 2000 called Maelstrom, and that won the award for Best Canadian Film at the Toronto International Film Festival, which I would think would be a pretty big deal. And apparently that movie was narrated by a fish. So,
although I will say, I think TIFF has become more prominent more recently. I think
in the last
in the
10
early
years,
2000s, it wasn't as big. Right?
TIFF's a big deal now. I don't know if it was 20 years ago, but
it's possible that directors like Denis Villeneuve made it a bigger deal.
Very possible.
Could be.
Yeah. But yeah, so that won Best Canadian Film at TIFF, which is cool. And again, apparently that movie was narrated by a fish. I haven't seen it, but that was on the Wikipedia page that's narrated by a fish.
Well, now I got to find out, is it just like a fish making bubble noises, or does the fish talk like a person, but it's a fish?
I'll leave that to you to report back to us and let us know.
We'll find out.
His third movie, he's got a 9-year gap in his filmography between his second and third movies, but his third movie is Polytechnique, aforementioned, came out in 2009. It won Best Picture at the Canadian Film Awards. The Canadian Film Awards have gone through several different names, so I'm just going to call them the Canadian Film Awards, but basically they're equivalent of the Oscars. And it won Best Picture there. And apparently Hugo watched it earlier today. It's about a school shooting, right?
It's a pretty grim story. It's about an event, one of the major school shootings in the history of Canada that happened in 1989. And that's the reason why it's considered one of the more controversial movies that he made. Although, because, part of the public didn't want this story to be used as entertainment. But I think having seen it and having read a bit about it, I think that the movie is very respectful towards the real life story, and sort of the driving force behind it was the main actress. The protagonist who plays one of the protagonists. I think there's 3 protagonists in the film, but one of the protagonists, basically, the actress was really interested in telling the story on film because she felt that a lot of this story was kind of being forgotten by the younger generations. And she contacted Denis Villeneuve to be the director of the story. And I thought it was really, really, really good. It's a smaller film. It's like barely an hour and 15 minutes long. Black and white. You can tell it has a relatively small budget, but I think it does the most that it can with it. And it's really respectful and powerful in the way that it shows this real life tragedy.
I think it's interesting that this isn't the first time you've heard of a movie coming out where people say they shouldn't make a movie about this because, as entertainment. I think it's interesting how often people will forget that a movie, yes, it's entertainment, but not all entertainment is to glorify the subject matter.
Not exploitative necessarily.
Yeah. So, if it's done well, it can be extremely powerful, which it sounds like Polytechnique is, as opposed to things like the United 93 movie that was less, about, it was more about, coming out with the movie as quickly as possible, to tell that story than it, was about the actual emotional and, cultural resonance of the story.
Do you not think United 93 is very good?
I don't think it's great, no.
Oh, okay. I haven't seen it. But, to what we previously mentioned, I feel like Denis Villeneuve is a good candidate to make a movie that is potentially fraught with that line of exploitation and glorification, whatever, because he is kind of the guy who doesn't really have much glorification in his subject matter. He just kind of presents it. And I'm not surprised it's apparently respectfully done, Hugo, because that's kind of what I would expect from the kind of movies he makes and the tones he takes. So that was 2009. The next year was Incendies, which is our film to remember today, and that movie was nominated for Best Foreign Language Film at the Oscars, again, back when it was called that. Incendies is the first movie of his I'd heard of, and I wasn't aware of it as it was coming out, but like when Prisoners came out, I was very impressed with it, and Sicario, so I kind of went back, and I feel like Incendies is the first movie that has like any kind of reputation or staying power. And I don't know if it's because his first 3 were just smaller movies or if they just kind of never really made much of a splash outside of Canada. But because clearly they're renowned movies in Canada, given the awards they were given. But I was actually kind of surprised to learn that Incendies was his 4th movie. I kind of just assumed it was his first. And
yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
I had kind of Polytechnique was a movie that I had heard about. But I thought it was his first feature. Like, I thought he had directed smaller stuff like shorts and stuff like that. I didn't realize that he had other feature-length films that he'd done before. But I'm quite interested in checking him out because.
Yeah, well, like I said, Polytechnique was 2009. His movie before that was in 2000. So like, there's a 9-year gap there. I think he'd be forgiven for thinking that Polytechnique was the first thing he'd really done.
Exactly.
But so he first came onto my radar with Prisoners in 2013, which I think is probably when he first came on most people's radar. Prisoners stars Hugh Jackman and Paul Dano and Jake Gyllenhaal, and it's really good. It's a tough sit, but it's really
excellent.
Good. Yeah.
I think that's a common thread among his movies, that there are a lot of tough sits in
really
Denis
good, but a
Villeneuve's
tough sit. Yeah.
filmography.
We'll talk about the common threads in Villeneuve movies, but I think there's I think you can extrapolate a lot of Prisoners into a lot of his filmography. I didn't see it when it came out, but I do remember it was nominated for Best Cinematography, which I thought was odd because that's the only nomination it got. I feel like that's kind of rare for a movie to just come in, get a cinematography nomination, then they get nothing else. But it is Roger Deakins we're talking about, so that kind of makes sense. And have we all seen Prisoners?
Yes,
I have. Yes,
the cinematography is just
incredible,
outstanding, and like it's not necessarily like in your face outstanding the way some movies, like the way Chivo Lubezki's movies are, but
or even in comparison to some of Deakins' other movies.
Even in comparison to some of Deakins' other movies, yeah, like Assassination of Jesse James, for example. But it's
or Blade Runner, yeah,
or Blade Runner, but it's really, really good. I remember when in 2013, IndieWire had like a list of their 10 favorite shots from 2013, and their number one favorite shot was the shot of the tree outside the house in Prisoners, like presumably as the girls are kidnapped. It's just like you're inside and people are celebrating Thanksgiving, then it cuts to outside their house and it's just like a push in on a tree, and like the score kind of rumbles beneath it and it's really ominous, and it's just a tree. Like there's not like a lot going on in the frame. But what? I
said there's nothing else happening in
right,
the frame.
Exactly. There's not a lot going on in the frame, but it's just so just the implication and the ominousness and
it says
terror.
everything it needs to. There's something missing from this scene.
Yes. Yeah. Prisoners is really good.
For me, in terms of the cinematography of Prisoners, it's not just how beautiful the movie looks, because it does, but it's also how the camera moves and doesn't move, or how it cuts and doesn't cut, that elevates it. Because sometimes, the scene starts and they use blocking a lot of it. So you have Hugh Jackman's character. I was going to say Jack Nicholson. I don't know why. Hugh Jackman's character.
Different movie.
It would be a very different movie. In like sort of far away, but the camera is in the car with Jake Gyllenhaal, and then he comes close, and the camera sort of moves because the car starts to. There's a lot of stuff like that, slow moving cameras, or cameras that are just completely still, but the actors are moving. It's just beautiful, and what he does with contrast in that film is incredible. Yes. Sometimes you have just a face and a black background behind, and it's stunning.
What I wanted to comment, one of the first things you said was that what the camera does or doesn't show you. There's a lot of restraint in Prisoners. Yeah. And I think that's a common thread in Villeneuve's movies, like what he does or doesn't show you, particularly for these movies that are hard to watch. These movies that are pretty violent. There is a lot of implied violence, off-screen violence, but a lot of on-screen stuff too. But it is interesting to study what he does or doesn't show you.
But also, like, cinematography aside, Prisoners is a great like mystery thriller type film.
Yes. If you haven't seen Prisoners, please see Prisoners.
It's fantastic.
Really good.
Surprising that it didn't get nominated for Best Picture, but I suppose it is. I don't know. Mystery thriller genre movies don't usually get as much recognition as they could. I think sometimes
it's a pretty punishing movie. Like, I'm not. Like,
it is. Absolutely.
Craft wise, certainly Best Picture caliber, but content wise, it's rough. I mean, even the Best Picture winner that year was 12 Years a Slave, which is also pretty tough. A tough watch content wise.
Tough watch.
Yes, but that's also
but more.
Historical.
I think more traditionally tough.
Yes,
if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, in Prisoners, the plot is centered around someone whose daughter is kidnapped, and so he himself kidnaps a developmentally disabled person and then tortures him to try to get information from him about his daughter's disappearance. That's what the movie's about. It's a tough sit.
And grim.
Again, I think I actually made a YouTube video about Prisoners a few years ago, and one of my theses in that video is that the movie is intentionally kind of pushing the audience in like what they're willing to tolerate, because again, like, we're with Hugh Jackman because we want him to find his daughter and everything, like, we're sympathizing with him, but then he does worse and worse things in the movie that at some point we're no longer with him, and like he's no longer sympathetic, and
it plays off of the viewers having been preconditioned in other movies to always root for the main character, and it don't always
finds
want to
the
root
line.
For
Yeah, it finds the line for you to, and then it crosses the line once it finds it.
Yeah, and even what they do with Paul Dano's character is pretty much the same, because he's a very unsympathetic character at the beginning, and then the movie slowly gives you a reason to not be so against this character.
Also, low-key, one of my favorite Jake Gyllenhaal performances too. He's
I love Jake Gyllenhaal. I think he chooses
fantastic.
So many interesting roles, and I really like a lot of the movies that he picks. So
I just imagine that Hugo would love Jake Gyllenhaal because so many of his roles are psychological.
Yeah, exactly.
Stories.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll talk about it in literally less than a minute. So, yeah.
Speaking of Jake Gyllenhaal, Villeneuve's next movie is a movie called Enemy, which won him Best Director at the Canada Film Awards. I think by that point they were called the Canadian Screen Awards, which is what they're currently called. But he won Best Director. That was released by Enemy was released by A24 in the United States, which is one of A24's one of their first movies.
I was surprised when I saw that come up at the start of the movie. I was like, "Wow, really? Oh, cool."
Yeah.
So, and I think it fits into their MO.
Oh, for sure.
Right.
And I think because of that, because it's an A24 release, I think that Enemy has a larger following than Incendies, for example. Like, I feel like more people are aware of Enemy, and it's got a little bit of a cult status in the US. I haven't seen it, but I have seen the last shot of the movie, because it's the kind of shot that
It's
people
something.
like share on Twitter and say, hey, look at this. Can you believe that a movie ends like this? And I can't believe that a movie ends like that. And it's a very upsetting final shot, but I haven't seen it, so I can let you guys cook on Enemy as much as you like.
Yeah, so I don't want to get into spoilers on it, because it is a movie that is worth watching and can be fairly easily spoiled. But for me,
yes.
what the thing that stuck out to me with Enemy was, I can't tell if it was more surface level philosophy and psychology than I was expecting, and I got it all, and I wasn't that impressed by it, like the philosophy and psychological aspects, or was it way more deep than I realized, and I didn't get all of it, and therefore I should be more impressed, and I don't know which it is. What do you think, Hugo?
I think that's a good take for that movie, because it is quite puzzling. It doesn't, it either, I agree with you, it either gives you enough to completely understand it, and then you're like, oh, okay, then it's not that complicated, or it's not giving you enough, and then in which case it's really interesting and bizarre and weird. As someone who really likes, kind of out there experimental psychological thriller things, I really like this movie, but it's not like my favorite Villeneuve film. It's sort of in my bottom half of my list if I were to rank his movies, but still very good, very worth watching, especially if you're into this kind of weird, creepy psychological thriller stuff.
I would say
not if you're scared of spiders.
Don't watch it if you're scared of spiders. You will be. It's rough. But I was going to say, now I'm forgetting what I was going to say. You can cut this part out,
while you're
Josh.
thinking about that, I will say that I think that, I usually get more from Villeneuve's movies on subsequent watches. So I'm not saying that you definitely didn't get everything from Enemy, because I haven't seen Enemy, and I also don't know exactly what you're talking about when you say you think you got everything from it, but maybe that's just me. I realized recently I'm not very good at like assessing a movie on first watch, which is why I watched Incendies for the first time last night, and I have to talk about it on a podcast, which is not ideal for me, but I like to watch a movie, take it all in, and then analyze it on second watch. Grizz, you thought of what you're going to say.
Yes,
Go for
so
it.
Enemy is a movie not unlike Under the Silver Lake in my mind, where it leaves you with a lot of questions that you cannot possibly hope to actually answer. And so if that's the sort of thing that would frustrate you, then that's not going to be good. You're not going to enjoy it. But if you don't mind having some questions at the end, I think it's worth watching for that. But what I found interesting was I read up a little bit on Enemy, and apparently Villeneuve had cast and crew, a lot of them had to sign NDAs, that they wouldn't explain what the last shot means to the media. So if you Google what's the deal with blank, the last shot of Enemy, it's a whole bunch of people like, well, here's what I think it is, but
like
none
I said,
of us
I've seen the last shot, and that's
none of
really
us
the only
know.
thing in the movie I've seen.
And there are some wild theories on Enemy.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, I agree with your Under the Silver Lake comparison, because it is one of the films that I would consider kind of Lynchian in recent times.
Which is what you said about
for many
Under the Silver
reasons.
Lake.
Yeah. But yeah, absolutely worth watching. I think you might not love it because it is very strange, and sometimes that can work, sometimes it doesn't. But I think it's great.
It's funny you mentioned Under the Silver Lake, because yesterday I was scrolling through Twitter and someone posted a quick 30-second clip from it where so I got to watch Andrew Garfield punch 2 13-year-olds in the face and shove eggs into their mouth, which is something that happens in Under the Silver Lake. Moving on, Sicario in 2015 was Villeneuve's next movie after Enemy. Sicario reunited Villeneuve with Roger Deakins, who shot Prisoners and would also go on to shoot Blade Runner. And Sicario was also his first movie working with editor Joe Walker, who has worked on every Villeneuve movie ever since. I saw Sicario when it came out, and I know a lot of people really, really love it. I don't love it as much, but are you guys higher on Sicario than I am?
I mean, it sounds like I'm higher on it than you are. I don't think it's a cinematic masterpiece by any means. I think it's really good, and I think within the action genre, it is elevated above a lot of those other movies in terms of its approach. It is it is it's definitely an action movie, but it's not like comedic levels of explosions. It's not, it's grounded in reality, and I think that I almost find it as more of a mature approach to an action movie than you normally would see.
Yeah, I mean, just compare Sicario to its sequel, which was Sicario: Day of the Soldado,
Day
which
of the
is
Soldado.
basically taking
I
the
didn't
gloves
even watch
off.
that
That
one.
neither of I haven't seen either, but it takes the Denis Villeneuve's restraint off and just makes it like a more of a dumb action movie. Is my
And I will
understanding.
say, I also liked Day of the Soldado,
Okay.
but for very different reasons. Like, I liked Day of Soldado because of how good it does the normal action tropes. But I liked the first Sicario because of how it avoided some of the normal action tropes.
Well, I mean, I will say that what keeps me from really embracing Sicario is that it kind of, excuse me, like the last third kind of, it really changes its scope in a lot of ways in the last third, where it like kind of follows Emily Blunt for the first 2/3, then leaves her behind for the last act, and it kind of becomes a different movie to an extent, which is not a bad thing, but like I was just more interested in the first movie that I thought we were in, and less interested in the second movie that it ended up being. That said, just some of the sequences in that I haven't seen it since 2015, but like the border sequence is among the most tense, best like tension set pieces I can think of from any movie ever. To be perfectly honest, just that's why I mentioned both cinematography and editor Joe Walker, that they can work together to craft something like that is crazy.
Yeah, and the cinematography in that sequence especially is a testament to the talents of Roger Deakins, because it's the kind of scene that would be very hard to do. First of all, if you weren't shooting on digital, because I think he makes the most of the fact that he's on digital and he can color correct that scene in a way that doesn't look, that it makes it look like night, but it doesn't look artificial. Like, because sometimes in movies it is at set at night, but it's either too bright or too dark, and it feels a bit odd. But that feels like exactly as if you were there, and I think the cinematography there is incredible. I think it's great as movie overall. I think it's really good. I'm just not as drawn to it in terms of what it's saying. The subject matter isn't as interesting for me compared to other films that he made.
I think that in terms of action movies, one of the reasons Sicario stands out so much for so many people is that the performances from the actors are also pretty good. Benicio del Toro is a fascinating character to me. He doesn't have a whole lot of lines. He doesn't have, but his presence is always very felt in the scenes that he's in. And I think in terms of action movies, you could do a lot worse than Sicario in terms of acting performances.
It's interesting that you keep framing it that way, because I never really thought of Sicario as an action movie, and maybe that's what's keeping me from liking it as much. Is I'm kind of expecting more of a drama in the sense of Prisoners or Arrival, and it is more of an action movie than those two movies, but it's also still pretty good as a drama.
Well,
like
yeah,
those movies are. So
so it's maybe for me it's just one of those things that kind of blends genre a little bit, and that's what makes it so fascinating to me.
So speaking of genre, Villeneuve's next movie is Arrival, and that's the first of 3 straight science fiction movies that he's made. Arrival, Blade Runner, and Dune. If Dune gets a sequel, then 4, yeah. So Arrival came out in 2016. Apparently, Villeneuve had been looking to do a sci-fi movie for a while and just hadn't found the right movie. And Eric Heiser's script gets sent to him. Eric Heiser's really brilliant script, and they make Arrival. And this was nominated for 8 Oscars, including Best Picture and Best Director for Villeneuve. And it only won for its sound editing, which is kind of a shame. 2016 was a really, really good Oscar year. Just the top 4 for me were Moonlight, La La Land, Manchester by the Sea, and Arrival. Those are 4 outstanding movies. So the fact that, Arrival was up against those was a tough beat for Arrival. But I think Arrival is one of the best movies of the decade, like by a country mile, and one of the best sci-fi movies I've ever seen. I really, really, really like this movie a lot. I put in the outline that few movies have made me cry harder than this one, which is true. But I also did see it like this is maybe the first movie I saw in theaters after the 2016 election. And given how much the movie is like a call for unity and working together and that kind of stuff, I think it hit me a certain way that it may not otherwise with different timing. But really, really emotional movie and just amazingly well constructed. Just the narrative sleight of hand that happens in Arrival. I don't want to say too much about it, but if you haven't seen Arrival, I'm imploring you to please see Arrival. Where we at on Arrival, fellas?
I loved it. I it's been a common thread if you haven't picked up on it for me in all the previous conversations. I like movies where the main characters are smart. And the main characters of Arrival are very smart and unabashedly so. And so I really enjoy that. And then in addition to that, the actual science fiction elements of it are fantastic. It's fascinating. How much do we want to like talk about the actual plot of Arrival? I don't want to give away like the ending or anything.
Talk as much as you like about it. Just don't give away the real thing.
Well, just like the aliens in it are such a unique creature in the science fiction pantheon, and the level of creativity that goes into coming up with that whole concept and how they communicate is next level science fiction awesomeness. It's so good. Go ahead, Josh.
Oh, I wanted to point out, you mentioned that you like when characters are smart. You also like happy endings. And
True.
I think in Villeneuve's filmography, Arrival's got to be among the happiest ending, which is a sliding scale for sure. I mean, there's a lot of bittersweet stuff at the end of Arrival, but
yes,
it's certainly the most life affirming of any of his.
For sure,
probably.
Yeah.
So
that's what I was going to say. 'Cause I wouldn't say it's directly happy, but life affirming.
There's a reason I bawled at the end of Arrival.
Yeah, and meaningful, absolutely.
Yeah.
Science fiction is, if you haven't picked this up, my favorite genre, and this is for sure one of the top like 3 or 4 movies, science fiction films of I think the decade and the century. Really, it's just an incredible riff on so many science fiction concepts. The way that it manages to tell an alien invasion story that is original is incredible. That's, of course, that goes
and realistic.
The credit
too.
for that. The credit for that goes a lot to the original short story and the script, but the fact that they were able to elevate just the sci-fi concept into an excellent drama as well is what makes the movie fantastic. And I think it's what Villeneuve does to some extent. He goes into a genre, which whether it's mystery, a war movie, a science fiction film, and inserts very powerful and meaningful human drama in it to elevate that specific genre.
Yeah, I think he always knows what buttons to press to like make the most of the story he's telling, for sure.
And Amy Adams in the film is just incredible. The way the amount of stuff that she has to communicate that are, and I heard this, I think it was in a video essay by Movies with Mikey, if you don't follow him.
Yeah, I was going to say this too. Yeah.
He noticed that she has to portray, and if you know the spoilers, you'll know what I'm talking about. She has to portray human emotions that are not possible.
Don't really exist. She has to invent emotions.
Don't really exist, but she does, and she makes it work. And when you watch the movie again, you see, she's communicating something that I could not pick up on the first watch, just with her face, and she's not even talking about it. It's fantastic.
I think that Amy Adams is probably my favorite actress, or top 5 favorite actresses, and I think this is her best performance.
For me, with Amy Adams, I love it. I love so many of the movies she's in. I love her performances, but then every time I go to think of who my favorite actresses are, somehow she always drops out until someone's like, "What about Amy Adams?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, let's throw her up on the
100%,
list."
100%, just always good, and very notably not nominated for an Oscar for this. She is. I think she's about to DiCaprio level by this point, because I think she has 5 or 6 nominations and has not yet won. So she's not quite Glenn Close, but she's in DiCaprio levels at this point. And
would you say she's Glenn Close?
Glenn Close now, I think, on her 9th Oscar nomination this year, and still hasn't won yet. But we'll see if
probably won't win this year either, by the way. So
honestly, I mean, we're going to do an Oscar prediction podcast at some point, but Best Supporting Actress is the most wide open race of any major category I've seen maybe ever. Literally any of the 5 could conceivably win Best Supporting Actress, including Glenn Close, so I don't really know. So after Arrival in 2016... last thing I want to say about Arrival is when that came out, I listened to a lot of like interviews and podcasts with the screenwriter Eric Heiserer, because the script is just unbelievable, and probably would have won an Oscar had the Academy not put Moonlight in the adapted category. Moonlight was based on an unpublished play, so like that's kind of in the gray area of original and adapted. They put it in adapted, and it won. Had it not been adapted, I'm sure Arrival would have won, because it's adapted from Ted Chiang's short story. In one of the interviews that I listened to with Eric Heiser, he talked about the first time... He talked about enticing Denis Villeneuve to direct this movie. And apparently they met for coffee 6 times and had like an hour-long conversation 6 times before he finally agreed to direct it, which I think speaks to... how careful he is in selecting his projects, and like how much he really has to be committed to a story in order to tell it, which I think you can see on screen how much care he gives to every story. My point is, he strikes me as a very considerate director and very careful and very deliberate, and if it took him 6 meetings with Eric Heiser to decide to direct Rival, I think that tracks. So I just wanted to mention that before I moved on. Next movie in 2017 was Blade Runner 2049. Which I'm a big fan of.
Huge
shameless
fan.
plug real quick. I have a YouTube channel called Movies I Love and So Can You, and I published a video essay about Blade Runner 2049 a few months ago, and it's like almost an hour long, and I feel like I didn't even say everything that I wanted to say in it, just because there's a whole lot to unpack and a whole lot to analyze in Blade Runner 2049, which was a box office disappointment, which sucks, because it was so good, and like, honestly, I'm not sure I really appreciated it at the time either in 2017 when it came out. Like, I saw it in theaters, thought it was great, but like, then that was kind of it. And I think it's kind of developed more of a reputation in the intervening years. But where are you guys at on Blade Runner 2049?
It was my favorite movie of that year.
Same.
I was so excited to watch it, and I got to see it in this like sort of independent theater that had the English version, because I usually have to see the dubbed version. And yeah, to me, I think that's my favorite movie of the decade, really. And I don't know, there's so much that you can say about it, but I think what's the most the thing that resonated the most with me is that it took what was already a very complex, deep film and reaffirmed it, made it even deeper, fixed some of the issues that I think were in that film, not to get too deep into it, but and managed to do a sequel that doesn't undo the original, that keeps the mystery of the original but reaffirms its themes. And it's, I don't know, I think it's one of the best science fiction films ever made.
It
ever.
did kind of eliminate one of the mysteries of the original.
Did it?
Did it?
Yeah.
Which
it
one?
answers the question of whether Decker is a replicant.
It
No, it
does
doesn't.
not answer whether or not Decker is.
Of course it doesn't.
It absolutely.
It absolutely doesn't. And Ridley Scott was mad about it, because Ridley Scott was initially supposed to direct it, and then he moved into a producer's role, and he wanted to answer the question, and Villeneuve made the decision: we are not going to completely address the question. There's implications, as there are implications in the first movie, but you can, there are implications on both sides. You can't 100% tell what the answer is.
It's interesting that you seem to think that it was answered, though, because I mean,
I derived an answer from the movie. I didn't hate the answer, which a lot of people.
But you can derive an answer. You can derive an answer from the originals, depending on which version you watch, I guess. But
I do want to explicitly say, though, that they do leave it intentionally ambiguous in 2049, and both in the movie and in the script. Like, if you read the script, like, they even make a note to say the question remains unanswered, or whatever. Maybe not those exact words, but that kind of thing.
I mean, yeah, and maybe it is something like because obviously I rewatched Final Cut of Blade Runner before going to watch 2049 in theaters. It could be that when I did that, whatever I thought the answer was to Final Cut, maybe it just whatever I got out of 2049 confirmed what I was already thinking from Final Cut, so I felt that the question was answered. But obviously, I guess more accurately, it's answered for me. But it's clear that
me too.
It's something that everybody could, form their own answer.
Well, after seeing Final Cut, I felt pretty confident about whether or not Deckard is a replicant, and I felt, strongly about it. And the sequel makes you kind of think it doesn't matter whether he is or he is
100% it doesn't matter.
Which I think is interesting. And Hugo, you said that it is a sequel without ruining the mythology of Blade Runner. I think it actually not only doesn't ruin the mythology of Blade Runner, it makes it more interesting. It
adds so much to it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I mean, honestly, I think it works phenomenally well as a sequel. It works phenomenally well as a big budget blockbuster sci-fi movie. It works phenomenally well as a character piece, as an investigative drama, as a police procedural. It won Roger Deakins his first Oscar on his 14th nomination, so that's
Which
always
is interesting.
Good. Yes. I love how it uses Harrison Ford. I love how it uses Jared Leto, to be perfectly honest. I think across the board. I can't say enough good things about 2049.
Even Dave Bautista. Bautista is so good in this film.
I was shocked at that first scene when Dave Bautista's in there, and I'm like, oh my god, this is Drax?
Yes.
Yeah.
with his tiny little glasses. He's got tiny little glasses on his big face.
And it's a slower paced movie than I think a lot of people would expect.
Nearly
from
3 hours
science
long.
fiction.
Yeah.
But I don't mind it at all. It's like you are living in this world with Kay.
Yeah.
Give me the 4-hour cut.
I don't think it's boring for a second. It's 2 hours and 45 minutes. I think it's outstanding for every minute of that runtime, personally.
And they, one of the things that people love so much about the original Blade Runner is the technologies that it, proposed as being possible, right? And which is a facet of the science fiction genre. You have to have cool tech in a lot of sci-fi movies, and they one-upped it in 2049.
Yeah.
There's so many cool
and kept it consistent as well.
Right. It builds off. It
feels like a natural progression of that world and that sort of level of technology.
And I cannot stress enough how fantastic the soundtrack is for 2049
Hans Zimmer
genre. It is. It is 100%. It fits perfectly, and it blends again so well with the soundtrack from Blade Runner.
Vangelis, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. Real quick, you mentioned the score for 2049. I wanted to shout out, I meant to earlier, Johan Johansson, who did the scores for Sicario and Arrival, both of which are great. He tragically died in 2016, 2017, so I'm assuming he probably would have kept working with Denis Villeneuve, but couldn't anymore. So Hans Zimmer did the score for 2049, and I agree, it is outstanding score. I think every piece of 2049 is perfect in its own way, including score, cinematography, acting, etc.
And also the perfect casting for Ryan Gosling, I think.
And Ana de Armas.
Uses him.
Yes.
What, sorry? And Ana de Armas as well.
Ana de Armas
Absolutely.
is fantastic.
She's incredible in this.
She made me care about a computer program.
Yeah. And that was the point.
Yeah.
That was specifically the point. It's amazing.
The most impressive thing to me about 2049 is the audacity of trying to improve upon what is considered one of the greatest science fiction movies of all time, and I guess I should specify the final cut. A lot of people, the original cut was a lot of people had mixed feelings on, but
rightfully so.
I just think how do you
Harrison Ford had mixed feelings on it, so
how do you one up one of the greatest science fiction movies of all time? This is it. This is.
I like this. I like this significantly more than the original Blade Runner.
I agree.
I like it more.
This is the plan. Any science fiction movie sequel in the future, watch what Denis Villeneuve did on 2049 and do whatever you can to emulate that, because he approached it in the best way.
I wish that were the way that the world goes. Unfortunately, unfortunately after the I love The Force Awakens. We've talked about The Force Awakens. I loved it. But I think the tendency with these late coming sequels of 20-something years, is to kind of go back and rediscover the originals, but don't add as much to them as Blade Runner 2049 does. And I think, with Jurassic World, the tendency is kind of the opposite of this film. And the fact that this film was a flop to studios is going to mean, we can't do that. Hopefully Dune works, though.
So it's a flop in the box office, but for fans of Blade Runner, it was wildly loved.
And fans of good movies.
And fans of good movies love it. And they also did an animated short for before 2049 that was fantastic.
Actually, a number of short films, not in live action.
There's
short
an
films
animated
as well, that
one,
kind of fill in
and
gaps.
there's 2 live action ones, I think.
But I want more of this universe, and that's why it's like Josh said, it's a real shame that it was a box office bust, because there's so much more they can tell. It's just like it's a lot like how I feel about Star Wars. There's a lot of stories that you can tell in this universe that don't have to be related to the original characters, and they could be equally fascinating to me.
Yes. I have a little bit more in 2049, but I'll save it for the Villeneuve generality section. So his next movie's been delayed a little bit. He was supposed to release Dune in 2020, the adaptation of the Frank Herbert novel. Notably a movie that David Lynch kind of, I don't want to say swung and missed on in 1984, but it was a famous flop in the 80s. But that was also a famous example of studio interference not being on the same, studio and director being on different wavelengths. So yeah, David Lynch couldn't wrangle in Frank Herbert's sprawling novel to make Dune in 1984, but Villeneuve apparently is trying to make it in 2 parts. So we have part 1.
Yes.
Yeah, so part 1 was supposed to come out in 2020. It's due out in 2021. We'll see if it comes out in 2021, or if, Hugo, you think they might push to 2022 so they can release it in theaters.
Both him and other directors have been quite critical of WB's decision of putting all of these movies on HBO Max first. I think their annoyance comes specifically because of the way it was communicated. Apparently, both Christopher Nolan, Lana Wachowski, and Denis Villeneuve kind of were surprised by this announcement. It wasn't something that was directly discussed with us.
They learned from the tweet.
Yeah, and I think they were quite upset by the fact that the decision had been made for them and so far in advance, because by all intents and purposes, especially in the US, by October, theaters should be open and operating at near complete level. So
yeah. I mean, we don't have to litigate the HBO Max theatrical distribution window thing, because we kind of talked about that in our 2021 preview episode. But and one thing we mentioned in that episode is that Dune is the kind of movie that is going to really rely on box office, because it is the first of possible 2 movies, but also very expensive movies. So if the first Dune doesn't make much money, there's not going to be a point in making the second Dune, which I want to see the second Dune just because I want to see Denis Villeneuve. Like, if you give Denis Villeneuve the setup, I want to see Denis Villeneuve give me the payoff. So we'll see how Dune comes out later this year.
And I love the idea, sorry to continue, but I love the idea of doing 2 movies for Dune, because there's if you've read Dune, there's a natural point where you can stop and then go to the second story. And I feel like, I'm not sure about this, but I think the second movie is actually going to go in some elements of the first sequel as well.
I don't remember if it was on this show or long ago. Hugh and I were talking about Dune and how excited you were about the concept that there was going to be 2 movies because of the natural stopping point. And I really hope that they pull through for you on that, Hugo, because
yes, it's gonna be
that'll be a real bummer if we don't get a sequel.
Yeah.
So I know that Dune is notoriously, for the David Lynch attempt, first of all, but it's just, even outside of that, it's notoriously, a hard to adapt novel. But as we talked about, I think Denis Villeneuve would not take it on if he didn't think he could do a good job. Like I said, he seems to be a very considerate and careful director, so I have the utmost confidence in him. I'm sure the movie we're going to get later this year is going to be outstanding. So I'm already spoiling the next part of the outline, which is, what do we think of Villeneuve's movies in general? And I basically just said my answer, which is that I think they're among the best made movies of the last decade, the movies that I've seen from the last decade. And I think they're Fincher-esque in their craft, in that they are, I see a lot of intentionality in every shot. just like Fincher, for example. And he doesn't have the obsessive reputation that Fincher does, but I feel like he's probably pretty similar. He's probably as, obsessive and considerate about getting it exactly right. Just that's at least what I see on screen. So, what about you guys? What do you think of Villeneuve's movies in general?
I mean, you've heard us as we're going through that. I don't think any of us have had a bad thing to say about a Villeneuve movie
Not really,
so far.
no.
So they're all good movies, and some of them are great movies. And he's easily in my top 5 directors going right now, based on their most recent body of work. So I can't wait for Dune, even though I haven't read the book, but I know I've seen what Denis Villeneuve can do in science fiction with Arrival and Blade Runner 2049, and it makes me very excited for a property that I otherwise had no interest in. And the other thing that I love of Villeneuve's movies is that it appears that he does a good job of picking his projects. He finds things that he can connect to as the director, as we see in movies like Incendies, and it just comes across in the movies that he makes. But also, like, he's not tied to one genre. It's clear that if he thinks he can make a movie in this, with this topic, he'll make it, regardless of what genre that topic would tend towards. And I kind of love that, because the genre is Villeneuve movies.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. Because I was going to say, the next thing we're going to talk about is like the hallmarks you see in his movies. And I will argue that even though he does work in different genres, there's a lot of common threads that he kind of does make the same genre every time, kind of. But before we do that, Hugo, what do you think of just, in general, vamp on Villeneuve movies?
Yeah, he's I think one of the 2 or 3 directors that I'm most excited in seeing what they're going to do next, because I've loved everything that I've seen from him, and he's doing the type of film that I specifically love, which is big budget, but highly creative and sophisticated cinema. That's my favorite thing in terms of movies in general. So I hope he's able to start getting more box office success in the same way that, for example, a Nolan, a Fincher, or a Tarantino would get.
Or at least a Nolan and Tarantino.
What, sorry?
Or at least a Nolan and a Tarantino.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, the Fincher films don't do gigantic box office, but for their budget, they usually take at home, a pretty decent chunk of change. I hope he can continue to work with as much creative freedom as he's had so far. Studios seem to really like him and really, want to give him money to do his projects, despite the fact that, they haven't always performed as well as, for example, a Nolan film would. But I absolutely adore his films. I hope he can continue to work for a long time.
The other thing I wanted to touch on, because we brought up Fincher again, was that, like Fincher, I think Denis Villeneuve does a great job of building a team, and we see that he uses same cinematographers, uses the same editor,
same editor,
for a couple of movies have the same composer for the music. And I think that's a hallmark of a great director, is forming a relationship and a team with those central elements of the writing, the editing, the sound, all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And
working with the best people
and working with the best people. And that's another hallmark of a great director, is that the best people want to work with you.
Exactly right. Yeah, exactly right. Some hallmarks. Let's go through these quickly if we can. Some hallmarks of Villeneuve movies. We kind of already said it, but he does a lot of mystery thrillers. And I think a lot of his movies are investigative in nature. Prisoners and Blade Runner 2049 are literally investigative movies in that they're kind of police procedurals, or at least police procedural adjacent. But Arrival is also a central mystery in the movie that must be investigated, and Sicario to some extent too. Incendies, for example, definitely an investigative movie. Also, and they also seem to have twists in them. I don't think we really associate Villeneuve as a director with twists the way that Shyamalan or whoever is, but most of his movies do have a pretty big third act reveal, and pretty dramatic third act reveals. I'm thinking Prisoners, that's a whodunit, so by nature that's going to have a big reveal in the third act. Blade Runner also kind of yes too, but Blade Runner, Arrival, Incendies, they all have narrative shattering twists in them.
Enemy, for sure.
And
Enemy
I
as
haven't
well.
seen Enemy, but
Yeah.
but like to the point that like the twist is so big, you're watching a different movie than you thought you were watching. You know, that's how big they are. And I don't think that's not like part of his reputation to have that kind of thing in there, but like that is a common thread I see in his movies, is like huge twists like that. And I also just want to mention that his movies are violent, but I kind of alluded earlier, they're kind of clinical in their violence. They're kind of matter of fact. Like he's not really telling you how to feel about it. I'm thinking of, I mean, there's examples in Incendies where like I'll save that, but like he doesn't like, it's never really gratuitous, the violent stuff. It's a lot of it happens off camera, or it's shown on camera in such a way that's, you know, clinical is the best way I can describe it, you know. And not just the violence, but also like nudity, for example. Like I'm thinking about this there's a threesome scene in Blade Runner 2049. Well, it's kind of a threesome, but
yeah.
it's so it's
man, a woman,
focused,
and a laptop.
basically. but that scene is like, I mean, it's visually stunning, but it's entirely focused on faces and hands. You know, it's not very lingery on female body parts, for example. It's maybe clinical is the wrong word for that situation, but it is interesting to see like what he chooses to show and not show you.
Well, and I think particularly with that scene, with, like you said, focused on the hands, that it's more about the sensuality of the scene than it is the sexuality of the scene.
Yeah, very good. And I think that like not to conflate sex and violence, but the way he shoots violence is kind of similar. It's not gratuitous, even when it is pretty severe. Yeah, I mean, what do you guys got for Villeneuve hallmarks?
Yeah, I wrote down more. I completely agree with all that you said, and I think it ties into some of the stuff that I have in mind when I think of his movies. I think, first of all, the way he deals with women in general, I think, is very specific to his films. A lot of his films have highly educated, highly intelligent women who have to kind of deal with a world that is dominated by men. I think you can see this, you know, obviously in Arrival, but you see it in Polytechnique. You see it in Incendies to some extent. And jumping off from that, he also portrays misogyny and sexism quite often and quite strongly. But I think what's interesting about the way he has political messages in his movies is that he, as we said before, he never tells you directly how to feel about them, but he kind of shows them from a distance, but you clearly understand what he means, but you are left to draw your own conclusions. And yeah, I think that's one of the strong hallmarks of his movies.
And you can correct me on this, hopefully, Josh, because I think we were both going to talk about the same thing. As I recall, when Blade Runner 2049 came out, there was a significant amount of controversy and naysaying about the movie, about its portrayal of women, and glorifying the sex over, the personality and all that stuff. Was that what you were going to talk about as well, Josh?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, yes, that's true, because, there are some elements in 24/9 that some people didn't respond to, particularly how women are portrayed. But more what I was going to say is kind of in general, 24/9 is the only one where people kind of specifically called it out, but like you can look at all of his movies and see a pattern where women do suffer violence in his movies, not just 24/9, but particularly 24/9. And I don't think I know that some audience members respond differently to seeing women receive violence opposed to men receiving violence. That's just like a societal thing that I think we're conditioned to, I'm not really sure what to make of that, but like I think that Villeneuve doesn't treat women any different than men in terms of who's getting violence, done to them, and that can be hard to watch at times because of our expectations that we don't expect women to receive that much violence. Possibly, I don't want to like read into other people's and
right. We can't speak for what everybody else is thinking about.
Yeah, exactly. But like there are some hard to watch scenes with women getting receiving violence in his movies.
Particularly with 2049, I remember when I read some articles that were stating complaints about the portrayal of women and the violence against women and all that, and it's sort of a similar thing that I've had to some of our other conversations where I don't think you're supposed to like that about 2049. In 2049, women are treated as objects in a lot of cases, and I think you're supposed to see that happening on screen and hate it. I think that's what Denis Villeneuve is going for, and I think a lot of people, when they see that, they just stop at the surface level and view this as like, oh, look at this cool sci-fi giant naked woman on. You're supposed to see that and be taken aback by it.
Yes, but maybe that's a level of nuance that some audience members aren't prepared to engage with. Possibly,
sure,
but
yeah, I think he himself and also Mackenzie Davis, who plays a sex worker in Blade Runner 2049, both commented on this, saying something to the extent of the world we're portraying is a hyper commercialized world. In that world, it's not going to be a kind world to women. It's kind of Blade Runner and the cyberpunk genre, in general, is kind of an extreme prediction of what capitalism could become. And so of course the societal problems of our world are even worse in those worlds. The racism is even more racist. The sexism is even more sexist. So,
we're supposed to see that and then go out into our world and avoid that future. That's what you're supposed to get from that.
Yeah, it is a dystopia.
But it also positions who the heroes of that story are. Who is male and who is female, and the heroes of that story also. Man, I don't want to give away too much, but I'm going to quote Priscilla Page, who's a film critic. I'm paraphrasing Priscilla Page, where she said that this movie is a dystopian hell for women, but it envisions a future that belongs to them. And it's interesting to keep that in mind as you're watching 2049 with a gendered lens, I guess.
Yeah, if you watch Polytechnique, there's a famous line in the movie where a character is pregnant, and she says, "If I have a girl, if I have a boy, I will teach him to love, and if I have a girl, I will teach her that the world is hers." And I think that's very much Villeneuve's stance on this.
Yeah. All right, we got to get to our film to remember, but real quick, just rapid fire. What kind of movie do you want to see Villeneuve make at some point? Hugo, go.
For me, it's exactly what he's been making. Give me a mystery, give me a sci-fi film with a big budget and very intelligent ideas. And that's all I want. That is my favorite kind of movie, so he's making it. I hope he keeps making it.
Grace, go.
I have two things I want from him. I want a Star Wars movie from him.
Good luck.
Okay.
I want a Star Wars movie from him where they let him go. It's unlikely that it would happen, obviously, but I want him to have creative reign over something in the Star Wars universe. I think he could do cool stuff with that. But even more so, there's a video game franchise, Mass Effect, that I think Villeneuve could do an impressive take on for a movie.
He could, yeah.
If they're ever going to make a Mass Effect movie, he's my guy I want directing it.
Yeah. Good luck with both of those, but I'm on board. I'm just saying,
No comment from me on the prestige to blockbuster pipeline that we're putting all of our great directors in at the moment. The fact that Chloe Zhao's next movie is a Marvel movie.
I want those blockbuster things to be elevated. I want to take a great director and give them a chance to turn this blockbuster thing into an actual great movie.
Okay, but it used to be the case years ago where a filmmaker would make great low budget movies and then earn the right to make their passion project, and nowadays it's directors make good low budget movies and earn the right to make a blockbuster, whether it be a Marvel or a Star Wars. And I prefer the old version. I'd rather see Denis Villeneuve pour his heart and soul into a passion project of his than pour his heart and soul into elevating a Star Wars movie.
Well, sure. Obviously, I would only want him to do that if he wants to do that. We're talking about how he picks his projects and he does a good job. If he doesn't think he could tell that story, then I don't want him to do it. I don't want him to do stuff for the money. I want him to do it to make a good movie.
For my answer of what kind of movie do I see Villeneuve make at some point, I wrote down, my first thought was police procedural, and then I kind of realized he already makes those. All of his movies, even when they don't involve police, are kind of police procedurals in their own ways. But I was just thinking about something like Silence of the Lambs or LA Confidential are those are up his alley, and I want to see him make something like that, even though he kind of already makes those to begin with. But I don't know. I wish him the best. Anything he makes, I'll see, and it's gonna be good. Can we move on to our film to remember?
Yes.
Okay. Our film to remember is Incendies. Am I saying that right?
Yes.
I think so, yeah.
Sure. Okay. Incendies or Incendies.
My 3 years of high school French tell me that is close enough.
Boilerplate stuff. This was adapted from a 2003 play by, I apologize in advance for my pronunciation of these names, but adapted from a 2003 play by Wajdi Mulwad, which itself was partially inspired by the life of Suha Bekarah. Suha Bekarah attempted to assassinate the leader of a Christian militia, during the Lebanese Civil War, and was sent to a notorious prison for it for a decade. And if you watch Incendies, plot points kind of reflect that situation. Incendies partially takes place in a Middle Eastern country, an unnamed Middle Eastern country, with fictional cities and fictional jails and fictional locations. But as I just alluded, you can kind of pretty much say that it's probably Lebanon, given the time frame and the fact that it's a Christian versus Muslim civil war happening in this country. So unnamed country, but likely Lebanon. And Hugo, why do you think it was unnamed?
Yeah, I watched an interview before we recorded where Villeneuve has, kind of said why he chose to not put it into a specific country. I'm not exactly sure whether the play was actually Lebanon or not. But
I think it probably was.
I think. Maybe, but I know that he said, because I watched his interview, he said he didn't want to put it into a specific country for two reasons. First of all, because he didn't want to. He wanted to tell a broader story that could have meaning outside of the specific situation of Lebanon, that could be kind of used as an allegory for other countries in the Middle East and countries that undergo a civil war, just kind of in general, and what that means. And he also didn't want to risk, as a white man making a movie about the Middle East, to have like sort of inaccuracies that might have been disrespectful or insensitive.
It's interesting you mentioned the universality of civil wars, because I think when we get in the spoiler section, we can talk about the allegories and metaphors baked into this movie about civil wars and the consequences thereof. So Incendies, it won 8 Genie Awards. I keep saying this, but I think the Canadian Film Awards have gone through several different names and iterations. At the time, they were called the Genie Awards. Now they're called something else, but it basically won 8 Canadian Oscars, to be a little reductive. And it was nominated for Best Foreign Language Film at the 2010 Oscars, and lost to a Suzanne Bier movie. I can't remember what movie it was, but a year in category that we've talked about before. So I want to ask you guys how familiar you were with the movie prior to watching it for this episode. What did you know about? Had you seen it before? And if not, what did you know about it going in?
I hadn't seen it before, but I kind of knew the basic premise of this mother leaving this mission to rediscover her past to her sons.
We'll get into the plot summary in a second. Yeah,
that's kind of the.
So you knew the general parameters in the movie.
Yeah.
Grace, what about you?
The only thing I knew about it was that it was in the IMDb top 250, and that I was going to watch it eventually.
Very nice. Yeah. All I knew that it was directed by Denis Villeneuve, and it was his last non-English movie before he started making English language movies, and that's really all I knew. So Hugo, you were about to kind of get into a plot summary. Do you want to give us a rundown of before we get into the spoiler section? Like, so don't spoil anything, but give us a rundown of the premise, the setup. What's the setup of this movie?
Premise of this movie is that there's this Middle Eastern woman who lives in Canada, in specifically Quebec. I think it's
Nawal. Her name Nawal was her name.
Nawal, right? Yeah. Nawal, I think. Well,
Nawal.
Whatever. I'm not sure about the pronunciation.
They lived in Montreal.
They live in Montreal, and she dies. I don't think the movie makes it clear why she dies, if it's old age or something specific. But
she was only like 60 when she dies. Yeah.
Yeah, she's quite young, so it's unclear. But essentially, she dies, and in her will, she leaves 2 letters to her 2 children who happen to be twins. One
Jean and Simon.
Twins, yeah. One woman and brother and sister, but twins, and she kind of leaves them with this mission to go back to the Middle East and find their long lost brother and their long lost father, who they
thought was dead.
Know about. Yeah, they thought the father was dead, and they didn't know they had a brother. So, and she leaves them this message saying
she gives one to each. She tasks her daughter Jean with finding their father, and tasks Simon, the brother, with finding their long lost brother they didn't know existed.
And she basically says, for now, you have to bury me naked, face down, with no gravestone. And until you've completed this task, there will be no gravestone on my grave. And
they have to not only track down these people, but also deliver letters to these people.
Deliver these 2 letters that she left them. Which is interesting. I really like the notary character that doesn't open the letters, and the children that don't open the letters. I think it makes for 2 reasons, because it works narratively, obviously, because it doesn't spoil the movie itself, but I think it adds an element of the integrity of these characters that I really liked. And that's the basic premise. And so we see the movie is kind of intercuts between the twins. First the sister, and then the brother joins her, because initially the brother isn't quite keen on this kind of mission that the mother has given them, going back to the Middle East and searching for this long-lost brother. I think she's searching for the father first. And we see Nawal's past as well. So it intercuts between the daughter and her at this kind of living through this separate story.
We see basically what happened to Nawal in the
and
70s,
how she ended up
this was.
Exactly.
And then
how she ended up in Canada,
and then we see Jean, her daughter, kind of following her footsteps, investigating her past that we just witnessed, and it kind of slowly unfolds, and we slowly learn more and more as her kids do. We learn about Nawal and her life, because she's a mysterious woman. So I think that's a really interesting setup. I agree with you. It's a cool setup, and the cutting back and forth. It's a really well edited movie that it cuts back and forth between the 2 timelines and what it reveals and when the audience knows more than the characters, when the characters know more than the audience, that kind of thing. Good use of dramatic irony here and there. I think it's just a really well put together movie, and I'm not surprised it was nominated for best international feature. You guys know I love opening images. I've said it on this podcast multiple times. Do we remember what the opening image in this movie was, or do I have to give the answer for you?
Oh no, I think it's a pretty staggering opening image.
Are we going to be getting into spoilers? Should I put up the spoiler warning?
No, we're not. No, we're talking about the opening image. That's
opening
so,
scene.
I don't know if that counts as a spoiler, because I was about to put up the opening image on the
I
screen.
have on the outline when to put the spoiler section up. Just
okay.
So the opening image is of it's like a palm tree. It's a landscape, a vista, and it's like the sun is shining. There's a palm tree. It looks kind of nice, and then the camera slowly pulls back. Radiohead starts playing on the soundtrack, and the camera slowly pulls back and reveals we're not actually outside looking at this palm tree. We're actually inside a building we later learned to be an orphanage, and we're looking out the window from the orphanage. And we're in this room where these boys are getting their heads shaven by militants, presumably to become child soldiers. So it's kind of like a deke of, you think you're looking at this thing, but you're actually in this room longing for that thing that you thought you were looking at in the first place. And it's kind of darker, more sinister than the opening image might suggest, which is, I think, you could extrapolate things from that opening shot, which is why I love opening images, is because you can extrapolate things from them. Am I crazy? I think
I agree.
No. Yeah.
You go from seeing this kind of beautiful scenery, and then it pulls in, and you're immediately like, oh no,
this is a lot darker than I thought it was.
What is this movie about?
Yes.
And then the shot, the final moment of that shot is the boy that is getting his head shaved, looking directly into the camera as the music plays, and then it cuts and the movie actually begins. It's a really powerful image.
And you are notably not sure what this has to do with the story until
much later,
30, 40 minutes in, do you kind of get what this opening sequence is. Before we get into spoilers, do we see any Villeneuve-isms? We talked about his hallmarks. What do we see in this movie that's a Villeneuve-ism? I said that all of his movies are investigative movies, and this is very much an investigative movie. In more than one sense, because the 2 characters that we first meet, the 2 kids, are literally investigating their mother's past, but also an investigative movie for the audience too, because we're kind of learning along with them as we see their mother's story. Not to spoil anything, we're not in spoilers yet, but there is if you want to talk about Villeneuve's other work and what you see there and here, there is a circularity in how Arrival's story plays out, and there's a circularity in how this story plays out. Not to spoil anything about either Arrival or Incendies, but that's something. That's a parallel between the 2 movies. Hugo, what do you got for Villeneuve?
To me, I think aside from the very simple educated women, which is something that, again, I notice in most of his movies, the film is kind of another look at the cycle of violence and what it does to individuals, but it also has on the background this civil war that happens in this unnamed Middle Eastern country. And I think another hallmark that we maybe haven't completely touched on of Villeneuve's movies is that they are very clearly about the characters and the effects that the world that they live in and the violence that they experience has on them. But the background always tells a very interesting story as well. Even if they don't really necessarily go into it in the plot or the dialogue, there's always a background that has a lot of meaning that adds both kind of a political opinion of Villeneuve's that kind of you can extrapolate from the background, but also adds meaning to the characters' struggles and what they're going through. And I think this is the clearest example of it, but a lot of the other ones have this element as well.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing I noted that I talked about, I feel like ad nauseum earlier, is that it's very clinical in its depiction of violence. You know, it's not, even though there is a lot of violence, it's not gratuitously depicted. And I'm thinking specifically of a scene that takes place on a bus in the first 45 minutes of this movie. That's probably the most violent scene in the movie, and it is very, very violent. But the worst violence either happens off screen or in a way that's not in your face, like
where the camera is quite far away.
Yeah, well, I think the two biggest things that happen on screen in that bus scene, the first thing you see like through a dirty window, so you can't really see exactly what's happening, and the most upsetting piece of violence in that whole sequence is shown in an extremely wide shot, so you're very far away and not on top of it. And that's just kind of, I think, how he usually shoots this kind of upsetting stuff is in a more clinical, less gratuitous way.
Yeah, and again, as I said, sorry to interrupt, but it makes sense here. As I said in the interview that I watched before, he says that he didn't want to have a lot of war scenes. He wanted to have one very powerful sequence where it kind of encapsulates and explains how violent this war was.
Yeah,
but didn't want to. He did want the war to be a background and the characters to be always at the forefront.
Yeah, I was just going to say this is like my favorite thing about how he tackles heavy situations, heavy emotional, heavy, you know, the violence, all that is he shows you just enough that you feel the full weight of whatever atrocity he is trying to showcase without making you watch it happen. So you see just enough to know exactly what happened without a doubt, and you feel all the emotion attached to that, but it keeps you just short of having to witness it yourself.
I think overall it shows incredible sensitivity on his part. He's very, he really understands where the line is and kind of gets you very close to it, but tries his hardest to never go overboard because he wants you to feel it without fully having to experience it.
Hugo, before we get into the spoiler section, do you want to talk about the portrayal of the Middle East in Incendies?
Yeah, to me, I feel like this movie has a really interesting take or portrayal of the Middle Eastern situation and Middle Eastern countries in general. I think it's much more nuanced and distanced from kind of stereotypes than a lot of Western movies.
It certainly doesn't take a side in the Christian-Muslim
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like it kind of does, but it's the side that you might not expect.
I'm not sure really. Okay, we can talk about that later. But go ahead.
It doesn't necessarily
I'm with Josh. I think that they did a good job showing that there was a lot to dislike on both sides.
For sure, absolutely. But the fact that it chooses to portray Christianity in the way that it does, I think, is pretty subversive of the stereotype or kind of the common idea that people might have of the Middle East through its portrayal in media. And I thought that was a smart choice, which of course is the credit goes probably to the original play, but the fact that he chose it and that he was able to put it on screen in such a nuanced way, I think was excellent.
I think going off of what Josh said earlier about his very clinical approach, I think that the way he portrays religion in this movie is not so much about the faith, but about the way people apply their faith. It's more about the people than it is about the religion.
Exactly. And I think choosing to have a kind of a Christian point of view in a Middle Eastern setting does that, because it shows you how certain negative aspects that people might associate with Islam as a religion don't really have anything to do with the religion itself, but in the way that religion can be used. And in this case, it might be Christianity.
Yeah, it's more about what team you're on in this movie. Notably, we're about to get in the spoiler section, so I can say this. Nawal is a Christian, but she takes off her cross and covers her head when she sees a bus, and like basically disguises herself as a Muslim in order to get a ride on this bus. But then that bus is stopped by Christian militants, and they kill everyone on board. But she is spared because she pulls out her cross and says, "I'm a Christian."
Was I supposed to have the spoilers up for that?
No, I mean that's in the first 45 minutes. I think that's free game. But now, please put up the spoiler section.
Okay.
I'm about to spoil the movie. Is it up yet?
Yeah, it's up. Go for it.
Okay, so as it turns out, so Nawal in her will left Jean a letter to deliver to their father, and Simon a letter to deliver to their brother, and turns out they have to deliver those letters to the same person because their father is their brother. In that, Nawal is pregnant basically when we first meet her in the first flashback. She gives birth, and they have to give up that baby to an orphanage, and she kind of spends the next several decades trying to track down her long-lost son. And in the course of trying to track him down, she kind of gets involved in the Christian-Muslim conflict in this country, and she, as I kind of mentioned earlier, assassinates a Christian militia leader and is sent to a notorious prison where she is tortured, and she is tortured by this guy who is like the torturer of the prison, including repeatedly being raped by this person. And it turns out this torturer is her long-lost son, and she becomes pregnant by her son and has the twins. Wow.
Yeah. Wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty grim
This is
twist.
a lot taken. Yes.
It's a lot. It is.
Yes.
We're talking old boy levels of twist here.
I've not seen Old Boy, but I know that I know the twist in Old Boy, unfortunately, even though I haven't seen it. And yes, this is not to give anything away in Old Boy. This is an Old Boy-esque.
Yeah, I'm just saying. That level of twist.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
it does make you squeamish.
yes,
I
I watched this fewer than 12 hours ago, so I'm still trying to like fully process this revelation. This is an enormous revelation in the final 15 minutes. So, unfortunately, we have to now talk about it. I kind of wish I'd watched this movie further advanced so I could kind of process what happens. But so forgive the half-baked ideas, but I'm trying to extrapolate something from this twist. And so again, this is a little half-baked, but there's got to be some metaphor or meaning about the damages of war and how it can tear families apart. And in particular, this is a movie about a civil war. And the things they always say about civil war is that they pit brother against brother. And this is like an extension and a perversion and an escalation of that idea, in that it is a family against family in just the most horrific sense.
It's not just that the war setting that's affecting the timeline here. It's also, as Hugo was talking about earlier, the religious and cultural aspects of her family when she has this child from they're a Christian family and the child is from a Muslim refugee.
Yeah, talk about that opening scene, actually. It's the first time we see Nawal in the flashback. You want to talk about that real quick? Or do you want me to do it?
I mean, you can talk about it. I don't know where you're going.
Okay. Well, what you're just alluding to, I just want to make sure that plot point is clear. So what you're just alluding to is that when we first meet Nawal in the first flashback, she's from a Christian family, but she's with a Muslim refugee, and that's her lover. And she's pregnant by this Muslim refugee. And when her brothers find out she's with a Muslim refugee, they immediately shoot him. And they're about to shoot her as well as like an honor killing thing, but she's spared by their grandma, who like, even though she spares her life, she also like disowns her, and that's why they give up the baby to an orphanage
and
like
away.
Basically, they kick her out of the house because she's associating with Muslims, so she can't be part of the family.
And
anymore.
also having a child out of wedlock.
Right. So all that is an embarrassment to the family. So it's not just that that violence in war destroys families. It's also that violence within families, or even just a lack of forgiveness in your family can destroy it, and the horrible consequences that can come from that decades later.
Yeah. I mean, you put in the outline here that it's a violence begets violence sort of situation. And I think you're exactly right. I think that act of her brothers killing her refugee lover, creates a cycle of violence that just continues throughout this next several decades of this woman's life, where, they don't really get into the specifics, I feel like, of the Christian-Muslim conflict, but it's constantly like, these people did this thing in retaliation of this other thing, and so then these people, in retaliation of that retaliation, commit more violence. It is a very cyclical kind of continuous thing, and if you want to talk about like a cycle of violence, like her son ultimately raping her in prison, that is a violent act that was a continuation of the violence started when her brothers shot her lover, this boy's father. And in kind of some perverted way, like, Nawal giving her children this task of digging through her past and finding this truth is kind of, in some sense, closing that circle. Like, I don't mean to be crude and like talk about how it's circular that this woman's son became her other children's father, but it is kind of the grace and forgiveness to an extent that
that's the part that closes the circle.
Yeah, that closes the circle. And like, I'm not sure forgiveness is the right word, but there is some level of grace to it's
more like an acceptance of the situation than it is necessarily forgiveness.
Yes.
But it's like, they're going to be able to get past this, is what her implication is in her letters, is they're going to survive that. Go ahead, Hugo.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that what happens to the son is that basically this Christian orphanage gets attacked by the Muslim side of the conflict, but they do save the children. So they save the children.
But then recruit them.
But they recruit them and they spare the... Well, yeah, they don't kill them. That's what...
they don't save them, they spare them.
Yeah,
they spare them. That's the opening scene we see.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then they radicalize them. And that is the reason why, he becomes... Actually, I said it wrong. I said the Muslims, but it wasn't, because he becomes kind of an executioner for the Christian side.
That's right, yeah.
So it's quite interesting that she's a Christian, but she doesn't take the side of the Christian. Not only does she not take the side of the Christians, she kills the Christian militia leader, Christian nationalist leader,
he became part
and then
of
ends up in prison.
I thought he was Muslim.
No, he's not.
No, he's Christian. So
he's Christian.
He's at a Muslim orphanage, I think, right?
He is, yeah.
The Christians destroy the orphanage and recruit...
Christians destroy the orphanage.
I'm not sure.
Orphanage.
I thought it was the Christian orphanage and the Muslims destroyed it.
Well, the thing is, she assassinated a Christian militia leader because of what she saw the Christians do to the Muslims on the bus, presumably.
Yes, that's what I thought. But I thought that it was... I thought it was the orphanage was a Christian orphanage and was attacked by Muslim, because Chomsidine, whatever the warlord was, I thought he was Muslim.
I don't think so, because she goes to prison for having killed the Christian leader.
Right, but that was after that she had decided that her faith be damned. I'm going to punish the people who are responsible for these horrific acts.
For sure, but it makes sense that she would be in the prison. The torturers would be on the Christian side, because that she went to prison because of that.
I think the point is, it doesn't really matter. Like, it's not clear who's who. It's just, people are switching sides, I guess, and it's just a cycle of violence, regardless of, the justification, which is Christians versus Muslim is the justification, but it's really just a cycle of violence. And
I think it's the nuance that the film brings, that it's not necessarily which side you're on. It's the only good side is her side when, as a student, she's against, a conflict in the first place.
Yeah. I have here in the outline, why do we think that Nawal sends Jean and Simon on this hunt? And I feel like I've kind of already answered it to some extent. Just the idea that just telling them what happened to her and telling them how they came into the world would be a lot different than, like, letting them investigate and discover on their own, I guess. Yeah,
that was basically my takeaway from it. Was they set it up at the beginning that Simon thinks that his mother is crazy. And we haven't seen how they were raised or anything like that, so that's Simon's view on her, and then it becomes clear as Jean is traveling throughout the world, the Middle East, it's very clear that she knows very little about her mother's past, and so it's safe to assume that her mother didn't tell them anything about how she came to be in Canada in the first place, or if she did, she told them lies, right? Because they're very much under the impression that their father was Wahab, who is the Muslim refugee who got killed at the beginning of the movie. So I think that if she had just told them this story, they wouldn't have believed it. Simon would have chalked it up to the insane ramblings of his crazy mother. And then also, she felt this was a way of fulfilling her promise that she gives to her firstborn when the baby's being taken away. She promises, I'm going to find you and I will always love you and all that. And this mission that she's sending her kids on, even though she's dying, is going to be the way that she fulfills that promise.
Well, yeah, it's for the son's benefit as much as her kids' benefit, her twins' benefit, because he doesn't know that he raped his own mother and fathered children with his mother until she tells him decades later,
Yeah, and I think in terms of why she sends them on this kind of adventure, well, if you want to call it an adventure, but anyway, there's also kind of partly, I think it's kind of implied at the beginning that especially the son has a very strained relationship with her mother. Well, I think the daughter Jeanne seems to be closer to her, even in the fact that we see her in the pool scene, they're together, etc. I think it's a way for her to finally tell them the story in a way that she could never do. I don't think she, during her life, once she was settled in Canada, I don't think she was willing to go back to that past, even just to face that trauma enough to tell her children about it. And the fact that she happens upon, the first son, who's also the second father, kind of gives her the spark of the idea to kind of put an end to the cycle of violence in this way.
I remember what I was going to say now. I thought it was interesting that I mentioned earlier, it's interesting like when we're ahead of the characters and when the characters are ahead of us, like when dramatic irony is employed and when not. It's interesting that when Jean first discovers that her mother was in prison and raped and had a kid in prison, she immediately assumes it was their long lost brother that she had in prison. But we already know that's not the case because we've already seen the circumstances where the brother had been born. So like we're ahead of her. We know who was born of that rape in the prison, but she does not yet know. And it's her and her brother.
And the scene where it's revealed is an incredible scene. I think the actress does such a great job of portraying the shock of
yeah. So Simon finds out their parentage before Jean does and has to like tell her, and like he tells her in this really cryptic way. Like he basically gives her like a riddle and she immediately gets it and
not
starts
just
crying.
a riddle,
and like
a math riddle, because she is a mathematician.
Yes. Oh yeah, I didn't put that together. That's true. Yeah. But I think that's actually a case where the characters are ahead of us because it's not explicitly revealed yet who their father was, but yeah. Which brings me to my last point, which is how many coincidences are too many coincidences in this movie? So there are. I just want to say, normally a movie is afforded one enormous coincidence to like set the plot in motion, but anything beyond that, people start to kind of question how convenient is this story. And in this case, there are two big coincidences. Number one is the fact that the guy who is groomed to be the torturer of women at this prison is also the son that she's been looking for decades. And number two, she happens to run into him decades later at a pool in Canada. And like, I think the first one is the kind of twist that's allowable because it kind of like the story wouldn't exist without this twist. But the second one is, I guess, kind of in the same category that like the story wouldn't really exist without the twist. But
to me, I think this final twist, the last twist, that she just happens upon him at the pool and sees specifically the tattoo, the tattoo that they had given him as a child, which reveals to her that it was him, and she recognizes him as the torturer, but he doesn't recognize her as the lady who sings, as she's called in the prison. Is kind of stretching my suspension of disbelief to its absolute limit.
I don't care though. Yeah, I'm not bothered by this at all.
The reason I buy into it so well is because this guy is the torturer. Yeah. He tortures thousands of people over his career, I'm sure. Whereas she is only tortured by him, and so she's going to remember him.
I'm not concerned that she recognizes him and he doesn't recognize her. I'm more concerned they just happen to be at the same pool in Canada.
Yeah. That's
run into each other.
The coincidence of them running into each other is kind of a stretch, but I think it allows the film to complete its narrative arc and its thematic arc. So it wouldn't
exist
really
if she hadn't
matter
found him.
for me. Yeah, exactly. Like it has to. It
It's
needs
instrumental to the story for sure. But I think it's also justifiable to me in that they are both sent to the States by the same person. No, this she is she served her time and did this thing for them, and so Shamsuddin sends her to Canada. Like she sets him up with a new life, and so then when this other guy is being sent off to Canada as well, this is where his connections are. Shamsuddin has set up some sort of network to get people into Canada in that area. So I think it's yes, it's a coincidence that they end up at the same pool, but the fact that they're in the same city, I can justify.
Sure. Yeah. And again, it's a bit of a stretch, but it doesn't really matter at the end of the day because it allows the film, first of all, to exist, because of course it wouldn't exist, but the fact that they meet him at the end is kind of a completion of the narrative arc of closing the cycle of violence, as we've said.
And it notably ends, the final shot is the son, the long-lost son, the torturer, standing at his mother's grave because Jean and Simon completed the task. Part of the terms of her will was if they were to do that, they would be able to bury her properly with a marked headstone, etc. And the movie ends not with Jean and Simon at her headstone, but with her long-lost son standing at her headstone. That's the final shot of the movie. Anything else on Incendies before we rank it?
My only thing is, do you guys think the boy that we see at the beginning is him specifically, or is it just kind of a visual representation?
We see his tattoo.
We see
the tattoo? Okay, yeah, then I must have missed that. Yeah, okay. Mm-hmm. So there's again another element of circularity to the film because it begins and ends with him.
When you first see the tattoo at the beginning of the movie,
it's meaningless.
You might not. Yeah, it's meaningless. You might just assume it's like he has moles on his foot. So you might not have internalized it.
Yeah, that's probably it.
So I'm going to take off the spoiler warning, so no more spoilers. Now let's rank a movie.
Snape kills Dumbledore. Oh, shoot. All right, so do I just want to give the top 10? It's probably going to be our top 10.
Yeah, just go to the top 10.
So our film to remember ranking from 10 to 1. Number 10, Another Round. Number 9, Rudy. Number 8, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. Number 7, It's a Wonderful Life. Number 6, Wind Rises. Number 5, The Departed. Number 4, Your Name. Number 3, The Thing. Number 2, Boogie Nights. Number 1, Citizen Kane.
So first I want to ask, Josh, what do you think of our ranking of The Wind Rises?
I haven't seen The Wind Rises, so the fact that it's number 6, cool. Great. Awesome. Good job.
Great. You would like
personally,
it, by the way.
I'm sure I would. It's about an aerospace engineer, which I am by trade.
Exactly.
I would put this between It's a Wonderful Life and Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, personally. Also on D, number 8. What about you, Hugo?
I'm running into some difficulty with this because I think I like it more. I don't like it more than The Wind Rises.
Don't do what you're about to do. Do not do what you're about to do.
No. I like it again. I just calm down. I don't like it more than The Wind Rises because I absolutely adore that film. But I would kind of possibly put it above The Departed if it wasn't for The Wind Rises. So I think
you did what I told you not to do, man. You did it anyway.
I thought you were worried about me putting it higher.
I was worried about you putting it above Boogie Nights.
No. What I was going to say is don't do the thing that you always do, which is say that you like it more than this thing that's high on the list, but less than this thing that's low on the list. Because
I thought you were
this ranking is meaningless and stupid. And you did it anyway.
Sorry.
It's fine.
I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about me putting it really, really high.
No.
I think I would put it right around It's a Wonderful Life. I would put it above, but whatever you guys decide, I guess.
Grizz.
I kind of agree with Hugo. I think I would put it just above It's a Wonderful Life. That's not to say that I would watch this movie again. Like, I would definitely watch It's a Wonderful Life before I would watch Incendies again.
Which means we're placing it 7th in our Film to Remember ranking. Ooh. So Citizen Kane, Boogie Nights, The Thing, Your Name, The Departed, The Wind Rises, Incendies, It's a Wonderful Life, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, Rudy crack at the top 10 for I'm not sure.
Probably one more week.
Yeah, probably one more week.
Depends what we do next week.
What are we doing next week?
Next week we are rehashing the 2011 Oscars, which were the movies that came out in 2010.
I'm so excited to do this.
We are going to award them how we would award them.
I'm so excited to do this that I'm almost nervous that like I want to pivot and make this the bulk of the podcast is doing this over and over again, but I'll try to restrain myself.
I think I think 2010 makes sense because this year we're getting the first Oscars of the new decade.
It's
so
10 years later.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it makes sense.
Yeah, so that's what we're doing is we're going to rehash those Oscars, and we decided our film to remember was going to be 127 hours.
Yes,
which is
it was nominated for Best Picture,
nominated for Best Picture,
Actor.
and in terms of the movies that were nominated that year, it's one of the movies that I think is most often forgotten compared to a lot of the other ones. So we're going to watch that one so that we have it fresh going into our rehashing of the Oscars, or rather, we're going to talk about it after we rehash the Oscars.
Which I don't want to spoil too much of the episode, but making 127 hours of Film to Remember might imply that we intend to like give that some Oscars. I'm not sure. I personally,
I'm not sure either. I do love the movie, though.
So we'll see. Yeah. Let's talk it out. Yeah, it'll be good.
But so that's what we're doing next week.
Yeah, that's going to be fun. Of course, we're not going to be doing every single category. We'll kind of
just like
pick and choose the main ones that we can comment on.
We're going to do the ones that we watch the most movies from.
But not just that. It was like, do you have a strong opinion about costume design or stuff like that?
I
Maybe.
Personally do not. I hate that category. Are we also going to possibly... Are we going to bring in non-nominees and talk about things that we think should have been nominated or anything like that? Or what do you think?
If there's big enough...
There's
snubs,
a glaring example.
If there's a glaring oversight, I think we can bring it in. We can fix the Oscars.
Yes.
And by fix the Oscars, I mean repair, not fix the Oscars like how it's already fixed.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Okay, on that note,
Josh is just going to cut that out, you know that.
Rate, review, subscribe, comment, share, rate us 5 stars, subscribe to YouTube. YouTube has subscriptions. Okay.
Subscribe to YouTube.
And all
follow
that
us on
stuff.
Twitter at all the places.
Follow us on Twitter
Good Game Grizz.
At Good Game Grizz, at Hugo_Panay, at Brosh Jadley, and at RTF_pod, which is the podcast. And don't follow at RTF pod. There are enemies.
Yes.
Follow
Do
at
not follow
RTF_pod.
_pod.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I'm sure they're fine people. I don't know them. Yeah. Anyway, that's it. We'll see you guys next week.
Bye.
Bye.